Nathan Parker was a man who had everything: wealth, power, and the confidence of someone who had never faced true hardship. As he stood on the balcony of his penthouse overlooking the city lights, he radiated the kind of arrogance that only a self-made millionaire could possess. He was a firm believer in one simple rule: money could buy anything: influence, success, and even love if necessary. That belief was soon put to the test when an old friend, Michael Carter, approached him at an exclusive gala. Michael, a longtime rival who delighted in pushing Nathan's limits, held a glass of fine red wine and smirked. "Nathan, you always say money can buy anything, right?" Michael asked, his voice laced with amusement. Nathan took a slow sip of his champagne, unaffected. "Because it can." Michael leaned against the balcony railing, his eyes scanning the city streets below. "What if I told you there was something money couldn't fix? See that woman down there?" He pointed toward the sidewalk. A young woman sat huddled against a street lamp, her thin frame wrapped in a tattered jacket. Her bare feet rested on the cold pavement, and a small cardboard sign lay in front of her with the words, "Anything helps." Michael turned back to Nathan, a gleam of challenge in his eyes. "I bet you $2 million that you can't turn her into a high society lady and stay married to her for 3 months." Nathan narrowed his eyes, studying the woman below. To him, she wasn't a person, just another project. He had reshaped businesses, rebuilt empires, and controlled markets. How hard could it be to polish up a single woman? "2 million, he repeated, his lips curling into a smirk. "You underestimate me, Michael." Michael chuckled and raised his glass. "Then prove it." Nathan didn't reply. Instead, he finished his drink and stepped inside, already formulating a plan. Minutes later, he was on the sidewalk, standing just a few steps away from the woman. As he approached, he got a clearer look at her, her disheveled hair, her exhausted but piercing blue eyes, and the silent defiance in her posture. "Excuse me," Nathan said, his tone more of a command than a request. The woman looked up, startled. And so, the game began. Emily Clark had spent years learning how to survive on the streets. Once, she had dreams, ambitions, and a steady job, but life had taken a cruel turn. Now, wrapped in a thin coat that did little to protect her from the chilly night air, she barely looked up as footsteps approached. "Excuse me," a firm, authoritative voice said. She lifted her head slowly, locking eyes with a man who clearly didn't belong in her world. His tailored suit, the unmistakable scent of expensive cologne, and the casual way he carried himself all screamed money and power. "What do you want?" she asked, instinctively shrinking back. The man, Nathan Parker, smiled, though there was little warmth in it. "I have a proposition for you. Something that could change your life." Emily let out a dry laugh. "I'm not interested in whatever scam you're selling." "I'm not selling anything," Nathan replied smoothly. "I'm offering you a deal. Marry me for 3 months, and when it's over, you'll walk away with $1 million. The words hung in the air between them. $1 million. More money than Emily had ever dreamed of. Enough to start over, to escape the relentless cycle of poverty. But there had to be a catch. "Why me?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. Nathan's answer was as blunt as it was cold. "Because you're here." Something about his tone made her want to refuse on principle, but hunger and exhaustion held her back. Instead, she asked, "And how do I know you're not just another rich guy playing games?" Nathan pulled out his phone and made a quick call. Moments later, a sleek black car rolled up beside them. A driver in a sharp suit stepped out and opened the door. "Get in," Nathan said, his voice leaving no room for argument. We'll discuss the details somewhere more comfortable." Emily hesitated for only a moment before stepping into the warmth of the car. As it pulled away from the curb, she watched the city lights blur past, wondering if she was making the worst mistake of her life or the best decision she'd ever made. Either way, there was no turning back. The morning after their quick, emotionless wedding, Emily Clark awoke in a room that felt more like a museum than a home. The king-sized bed was covered in silk sheets, and sunlight streamed through towering windows that overlooked a manicured garden. Everything was pristine, expensive, and completely foreign to her. A soft knock at the door startled her. A housekeeper entered, wheeling in a silver cart with breakfast, fluffy scrambled eggs, fresh fruit, and a steaming cup of coffee that smelled richer than anything Emily had tasted in years. She hesitated before taking a bite, almost expecting the food to disappear like a cruel dream. As she ate, reality sank in. She was now Mrs. Nathan Parker, wife of a man she barely knew. Nathan arrived shortly after, looking as polished as ever in a tailored suit. He placed a leather folder in front of her. "Here's the contract," he said matter-of-factly. "Read it, sign it, and we'll meet at the courthouse at 2. Emily flipped through the pages, scanning the terms. Everything was carefully outlined. She would live in his mansion, attend social events by his side, and, in return, she would receive $1 million at the end of 3 months. No romance. No real obligations. Just a business arrangement. "This feels unreal," she admitted, setting the pen down for a moment. Nathan's expression didn't change. "It's simple. Stick to the agreement, and you'll walk away with more money than you've ever had." Emily exhaled slowly before signing her name at the bottom of the page. The moment the ink dried, she felt a strange weight settle in her chest. The wedding was quick, just signatures on a legal document, a judge presiding over the formalities, and 2 witnesses. No vows, no guests, no emotion. As they walked out of the courthouse, Nathan placed a hand on her lower back, not with affection, but with precision, like checking off a task on his to-do list. As they drove back to his mansion, Emily stared out the window, trying to process what she had just done. The world outside felt unchanged, but her life had shifted completely. She had traded freedom for comfort, survival for security. But at what cost? And what had she really signed up for? Emily sat at the grand dining table, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of a fine porcelain plate. Across from her, Nathan ate in silence, his movements precise and indifferent. The chandelier above them cast a golden glow over the room, but no amount of luxury could soften the chill in the air. "How are you settling in?" Nathan asked, almost as if making small talk with a business associate. Emily set her fork down. "It's a lot to take in. I'm not used to this much luxury." Nathan smirked. "You'll get used to it." Would she? Emily wasn't so sure. Something about this entire arrangement felt off, not just the contract she had signed, but the man sitting across from her. There was a coldness in his eyes, a detachment that sent shivers down her spine. Later that night, as she walked through the long marble hallways of the mansion, something in the back of her mind began to stir. A familiar unease. A memory she couldn't quite place. Then it hit her. Years ago, she had sat in a sterile office, hands clutching a resume she had worked so hard to perfect. It was supposed to be the opportunity that would change her life. The company? Parker Enterprises. The man sitting behind the desk? Nathan Parker. She remembered the way he had barely glanced at her credentials before dismissing her with a sharp, cutting remark. "We don't waste time on amateurs." She had left that interview humiliated, her confidence shattered. One rejection turned into another, and before long, she found herself slipping through the cracks of society. Now, as she stood in his mansion, his wife, even if only on paper, the irony was almost unbearable. Determined, she stormed down to Nathan's study. He was seated at his desk, flipping through a stack of documents when she burst in. "Do you really not remember me?" she demanded. Nathan frowned, clearly caught off guard. "Should I?" Emily clenched her fists, her heart pounding. "A few years ago, I walked into your company looking for a job. You didn't just reject me, you humiliated me." Nathan leaned back, his expression unreadable. "I interview dozens of people every month. I don't remember all of them." His indifference cut deeper than she expected. "Of course you don't," she whispered bitterly. "People like me don't matter to men like you." As she turned to leave, Nathan remained silent, but for the first time since she had met him, something in his gaze shifted. A flicker of something she couldn't quite name. Was it recognition? Guilt? Or something else entirely? The mansion was vast, but to Emily, it suddenly felt suffocating. The weight of her past encounter with Nathan bore down on her, yet he had dismissed it as if it were nothing. As the days passed, she remained distant, watching him from afar, waiting for a sign that he felt even a fraction of the regret she carried. Then, one evening, curiosity led her to his study. The door was slightly ajar, the glow of a desk lamp illuminating stacks of neatly arranged documents. Something about the room felt calculated, like everything in Nathan's world. Emily hesitated before stepping inside, her fingers skimming the polished wood of his desk. That's when she saw it. A folder sat open, revealing printed messages, a conversation between Nathan and another man. Her eyes darted across the text, her breath catching in her throat. "So, has she agreed?" "Yes. It's only a matter of time before I win." Emily's hands trembled as she scanned further. There it was. Proof of what she had feared all along. She wasn't a person to Nathan, she was a bet. A game. A challenge for his amusement. Her stomach churned. She had known something felt off, but seeing it in black and white made the betrayal all the more painful. The door creaked open behind her. "What are you doing in here?" Nathan's voice was low, tense. Emily clutched the papers to her chest and turned, her eyes burning with fury. "Is this how you see me? Just a bet to feed your ego?" Nathan's expression hardened as he stepped forward. "Emily, let me explain." She took a step back. Don't you dare try to justify this." Her voice wavered, but the anger in her eyes was unwavering. Nathan ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "It's not as simple as it seems." Emily let out a bitter laugh. "Not simple? You wagered on my life like I was nothing more than a poker chip." Silence filled the space between them. Nathan looked at her, but for the first time, he had nothing to say. Emily's chest rose and fell rapidly. She could hear the blood pounding in her ears. She had been played. Without another word, she threw the papers onto his desk and stormed out. Nathan remained in place, staring at the scattered documents. For the first time in years, he felt as though he had lost control. And Emily? She knew one thing for certain, she had to get out of there. Emily's heart pounded as she rushed up the grand staircase, her breath shallow and ragged. She had to get out. Now. The betrayal she had just uncovered burned through her veins like fire. She had foolishly started to believe that maybe, just maybe, Nathan Parker was more than the arrogant millionaire she had married for money. But the truth had been laid bare in black and white, She was just a bet, a game, a prize to be won. Locking her bedroom door behind her, she pressed her back against it, trying to steady her breathing. The mansion, once merely unfamiliar, now felt like a prison. She glanced toward the window, the night stretching beyond it. There was no way she would stay another night under this roof. Moving quickly, she grabbed a small bag and packed what little she had. A change of clothes, a few personal items, nothing that would slow her down. She glanced around the lavish room, knowing she was leaving behind a life of comfort, but comfort at what cost? Her dignity? Her self-respect? She opened the window, looking down at the trellis covered in climbing roses. It wasn't the safest escape route, but she had no other choice. Carefully, she swung her legs over the ledge and began to climb down, her fingers gripping the metal frame tightly. The cold night air bit at her skin, but she welcomed it. Anything was better than staying. When her feet finally touched the ground, she wasted no time. Pulling the hood of her sweater up, she hurried toward the main gate. With every step, she put more distance between herself and the life she had been trapped in. The city was a blur of neon lights and distant sirens as she walked aimlessly, unsure of where to go. Her stomach churned with a mixture of exhaustion and anger. She had no home, no money, and no real plan. But she had herself, and that would have to be enough. Hours passed before she finally found shelter in a subway station. She curled up on a bench, wrapping her arms around herself for warmth. The hard metal was a cruel reminder of how far she had fallen. Yet, for the first time in weeks, she felt free. Back at the mansion, Nathan Parker stood in her empty room, staring at the open window. His jaw clenched as he whispered to himself, "She ran." Nathan Parker had always been a man in control. His wealth, his power, his carefully constructed life, it all operated like a well-oiled machine. But now, standing in Emily's empty bedroom, staring at the open window and the marks on the trellis, he felt something unfamiliar. Panic. She was gone. The realization settled like a weight in his chest. He had expected anger after she discovered the bet, but he hadn't expected her to run. "Check the security cameras," he ordered his butler, his voice tight. "Find out which direction she went." But deep down, he already knew. Emily had spent too much of her life struggling on the streets. She would have disappeared into the night without a trace, knowing exactly how to stay hidden. Nathan grabbed his coat and stormed out to his car. He wasn't waiting for anyone else to find her, he would do it himself. Emily shivered as she curled up tighter on the cold metal bench of the subway station. The thin hoodie she wore did little to protect her from the night air. Her body ached with exhaustion, but she refused to close her eyes. She had nowhere to go, no plan, but at least she was free. A deep cough rattled in her chest, and she wrapped her arms around herself, trying to suppress the chills creeping through her body. The past few weeks of emotional turmoil had left her drained, and now it seemed her body was finally giving out. Still, she refused to regret leaving. She wouldn't be someone's game piece. Nathan had been searching for hours. He had driven through the city streets, scanning sidewalks, shelters, and places where someone with nothing might go to escape. Then, finally, he saw her. She was curled up on a bench in the subway station, her face pale, her body trembling. The sight sent a jolt through his chest. This wasn't the fiery, sharp-tongued woman he had married. She looked weak. Fragile. He rushed toward her, kneeling beside the bench. "Emily," he said urgently. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "What are you doing here?" "I'm taking you home." "I don't have a home," she whispered. Nathan's jaw tightened. She did now. And whether she liked it or not, he wasn't leaving without her. Nathan sat in the stiff hospital chair, elbows on his knees, staring at Emily's frail form in the hospital bed. The rhythmic beeping of the monitor was the only sound in the sterile room. She looked so small. When he had found her in the subway station, she had been burning with fever, barely able to lift her head. She had resisted at first, weakly swatting his hands away, but she was too sick to fight. He had carried her to his car and driven straight to the hospital, ignoring every accusing voice in his head. Now, as he watched her sleep, he wondered if this was the moment he had truly lost her. The door creaked open, and a nurse stepped in. She's stable now, but she needs rest. Dehydration and exhaustion caught up with her. Nathan nodded, rubbing his hands together. He had seen Emily strong, defiant, and fearless. This felt wrong. An hour later, Emily stirred. Her eyelids fluttered open, and for a brief second, she looked confused. Then she saw Nathan and her expression hardened. "Why are you here?" Her voice was weak but laced with the same fire he had always admired. Nathan leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "Because I care." A hollow laugh escaped her lips. "You don't know what that means." Nathan exhaled slowly. "Maybe I didn't before. But I do now." Emily turned her head away, staring at the drip in her arm. "You used me," she murmured. "You treated me like some challenge. And now what? You suddenly care?" Nathan swallowed hard. He deserved that. "I know I can't undo what I did," he admitted. "I don't expect you to forgive me. But I want to show you that I'm not that man anymore." Emily didn't respond. She was too tired to argue, too drained to push him away. But she wasn't ready to believe him either. Nathan sat back in his chair, his gaze unwavering. He would prove himself. Not with words, but with actions. Because for the first time in his life, he wasn't trying to win, he was trying to make things right. The days in the hospital passed slowly. Nathan stayed by Emily's side, ensuring she had everything she needed: fresh meals, warm blankets, even books to pass the time. He didn't push her, didn't demand forgiveness. He simply stayed. Emily, still weak, watched him with cautious eyes. She had seen men like him before, powerful, self-serving, always looking for control. But there was something different now. He wasn't trying to own her. He was waiting. One afternoon, as she picked up a novel from the bedside table, something fell from its pages, a small, folded letter. The handwriting was firm and deliberate, the ink slightly smudged as if the writer had hesitated. "Emily, I know words aren't enough to undo what I've done. I won't ask for forgiveness, but I need you to know this: I'm trying. I've spent my life believing that money and power were the only things that mattered. You showed me that I was wrong. You made me see the cost of my arrogance, the weight of my actions. And for the first time, I want to change, not for a bet, not for appearances, but for myself. If you never trust me again, I understand. But I will spend every day proving to you that I am more than the man who hurt you. Nathan." Emily read the letter twice, her fingers tightening around the paper. It was raw, unpolished, so unlike the Nathan Parker she had come to know. When the door opened, she didn't look up right away. Nathan hesitated in the doorway, waiting. Finally, she met his gaze and held up the letter. "Did you mean it?" Nathan nodded, his voice steady. "Every word." She studied him, searching for deception, for arrogance, for the old Nathan. But he wasn't there. For the first time, she saw a man willing to change. That didn't mean she was ready to forgive. Not yet. But as she tucked the letter into the book, she knew one thing: for the first time, she wasn't certain that walking away was the right choice. Emily sat by the hospital window, staring at the city skyline. The setting sun painted the buildings in hues of gold and orange, a stark contrast to the storm inside her mind. Nathan's letter sat beside her, folded neatly. She had read it more times than she cared to admit. Was he truly changing, or was this just another calculated move? A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Nathan stood in the doorway, holding a small bag. "I brought you something," he said, stepping inside. Emily eyed him warily. "What is it?" Nathan set the bag on the table and pulled out a small sketchbook and a set of charcoal pencils. "You once told me you liked to draw," he said, his tone hesitant. "I thought it might help pass the time." Emily hesitated before reaching for the sketchbook, running her fingers over the cover. It had been years since she had drawn anything. "This doesn't change what happened," she said quietly. Nathan nodded. "I know. And I don't expect it to." He took a step back, his usual commanding presence softened. "But I want to do things differently. No more bets, no more games. Just, let me show you who I can be." Emily studied him, trying to find cracks in his sincerity. She wanted to believe him. But belief was dangerous. Still, the weight of the sketchbook in her hands felt real. "I don't know if I can trust you, Nathan." His jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Then don't trust me yet. Just watch." For the first time in weeks, Emily felt something shift. She wasn't ready to forgive. She wasn't even sure if she wanted to stay. But she was willing to see what happened next. As Nathan turned to leave, Emily opened the sketchbook, letting the blank pages stare back at her. A fresh start. Or maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something real. Life rarely unfolds the way we expect. Mistakes are made, trust is broken, and sometimes, the people we least expect to change surprise us the most. Nathan's story is a reminder that redemption is possible, but it must be earned, not through words, but through actions. For many, especially those who have lived long enough to see life's ups and downs, this story reflects a truth we all know too well: change is hard, but not impossible. People can grow when they are willing to face their flaws, take responsibility, and truly make amends. Trust, once broken, is difficult to rebuild, but when given a second chance, it can lead to something even stronger. Emily's journey teaches us another lesson: forgiveness is a choice, not an obligation. We don't have to forget the past, but we also shouldn't let it define our future. Healing takes time, and sometimes, the best thing we can do is watch, listen, and allow people to prove who they really are. Whether in love, friendships, or family, the ability to learn, grow, and offer second chances is what makes life meaningful. Because sometimes, the greatest transformations come from the most unexpected places.